Hi, and welcome to another lecture. In this video, I explained the nature, the purpose, and the meaning of metaphysics. Let me start with a funny note. I found this comic strip on the internet. It's a website called existentialcomics.com. And this will give you an idea of what metaphysics is. So in this comic strip, there's Plato. There are different characters. There's Plato and Diogenes, and also Socrates. So as you all know, Plato founded the academy, which was one of the first, the prototype of a university. And he lectured there for many years. Aristotle was a student there. Everybody knows this, right? So while Plato is giving a lecture, he's explaining something metaphysical. He's explaining his metaphysical theory. You see, he says, all things have a pure essence, a form, which is their true being that defines them. And Diogenes interrupts. Boo! Your abstract philosophy is stupid. Diogenes, says Plato, please, I'm trying to give a lecture. Okay, what about this cup, Plato? Is there an eternal, perfect cup somewhere? Yes, Plato responds, in a sense, there is a form of cupness. And what about the emptiness inside the cup? Well, I think, Diogenes responds, you'll find, Plato, that the emptiness is in here. This, by the way, it is said to be a true story, but who knows? So Plato is frustrated and storms out of the room and slams the door. And Socrates is there. What's the matter, Plato? Nothing, Socrates. Is it Diogenes? Is he bullying you again? I don't want to talk about it. Look, you have to stand up to him. I said I don't want to talk about it. Well, you know, Protagoras, another philosopher, pre-Socratic philosophers, used to bully me. But then, one day, in front of everyone, I made fun of his relativism for being self-defeating. And he never bullied me again. So I need to make fun of his cynicism? Exactly. And that's why we must live in a natural state. Your cynic philosophy is no better than that of a lowly dog. A dog, you say, Plato? And he bites his arm. What the hell are you doing? You said I'm a dog? So, a dog I will be. And Plato once again slams the door. And Socrates goes, are you okay? What happened? He bit me. He bit you? Yeah. Well, Protagoras wasn't much of a biter. I'm not sure I can really help you with that. But this funny comic strip reveals some clues on at least one aspect of metaphysics, namely reality, existence. As we will see in the following videos, we will study reality and Plato's theory of reality. But let's talk about what metaphysics is. Well, in order to rather than giving you a definition, a dictionary definition, which I will do later, I want to explain what metaphysics is by asking some questions. Some of the questions that metaphysics is concerned about. For example, one of the very first question is, who am I? And this is a metaphysical question because, for one reason, it's a question that can't completely be answered in scientific terms. We typically, when we don't know what something is, we go to the dictionary, we try to define it. And if there's a difficult question, we might ask a scientist. But a scientist would be puzzled by this question. Well, what do you mean by who am I? If you mean scientifically, I can tell you, this is your DNA, you're a member of the species Homo sapiens, and so on, blah, blah, blah. But the question, as you can see, the question is asking something much, much deeper than just the DNA and the physical reality of human beings or animals. Who am I? In a sense, in what I perceive as a reality every day of my life, if I stop for a moment and I think, who am I? What is this individual? Not to mention the fact that we will see later when we study René Descartes, that Descartes questions even whether we human beings, or I as a being, exist in the form in which we all think that we exist, namely in a physical form, with legs and hearts and blood and skin and so on. In fact, René Descartes, the famous French philosopher, says that the only thing that we know for sure is that, actually I should be careful, I should say the only thing that I can know for sure, because I don't know if you exist, if everything else that I perceive exists. But the only thing that I can be sure is that I am a thinking thing, or thinking being, let's call it. Why? Well, the reason is because I'm thinking. And so I must exist as a thinking thing. Whether I have a body, whether there are other bodies, I don't know. So, who am I? This is one of the questions. Another question is interesting. Now, not a question about myself or others, but rather a question about existence itself. Why is there something rather than nothing? I mean, if you think about it, isn't it the most bizarre idea to think about it? Why is there a world? Granted, we know what that means, that there's a world. I mean, we don't even know what it means to say there is a world. What is the world? The world, Wittgenstein said, is all that is the case. Thank you very much, Wittgenstein. What is the case? We don't know. The world is all the propositions that exist. The world is objects, but what are objects? But I'm asking even more questions that I can answer. But let's go back to the original question. What is there? Why is there something rather than nothing? Isn't it bizarre that we perceive, or at least I should always speak, as Descartes was careful enough to speak for himself, to use the pronoun I experience a bunch of things. I experience going to bed. waking up in the morning, don't know which one is true, which one is a dream, or what a dream is for that matter. Space and other things, friends, bottles of water, pizzas. But why is it that these things exist? Perhaps it would have been possible, it would have been the case that nothing existed, in which case there would be no case. Nothing just existed. And in fact, is that even a possibility, that nothing exists? Or existence is, reality is what must be, and there cannot be any absence of reality in existence? These are very deep questions. Another question is, as I asked a moment ago, what is reality? If, for example, we say that reality must exist, there cannot be no reality. Nothing, the absence of being, cannot exist. But what is reality anyway? Obviously, the naive answer is reality is what I experience. But what is it that I experience? Another question, totally different question. Is there a supreme being? This, of course, is the question, is a metaphysical question. It's a question, once again, it's a question that typically scientists would try to dodge. Maybe not nowadays, because scientists think that they can answer these questions too, but this question is not a question that you can enter a laboratory and do some kind of experiments or a survey and ask people, is there a supreme being? There are many arguments for the existence of God. In the following lectures, I will present some of those arguments. This is a question, one of the most fundamental questions of existence, whether there is a God, and whether we can possibly know if there is a God. Another question is a question of causation. Now, when I say causation, I really mean, in the most scientific sense, cause and effect. Okay, I topple a domino piece, and you have seen those videos, maybe perhaps on YouTube. These people who set up these long patterns of files of domino pieces, and then they topple them, and they create that beautiful thing. I don't know what to call it. That beautiful game where all the domino pieces fall down. And what happens when you push the first one? Typically, that's the idea. The idea is that my pushing, my exercising pressure upon this first domino piece, so my exercising that pressure is the cause, the physical cause that makes the domino piece fall down. And in its turn, when that piece falls down and hits a second domino piece, well, the second domino piece is caused by the first one, by the fall of the first one, to also fall down and perhaps hit the next one, a third one, and so on. And so when it comes to causation, all sorts of interesting and difficult questions come about. For example, first of all, whether this idea of cause and effect represents something that really exists in the world. In another video, I talk about David Hume, who was an 18th century philosopher who believed that there's no evidence for causation. What it is Hume thought, it's just a matter of being habituated. Suppose you, for example, to explain to you what that means. Suppose you have a dog. The dog, pretty much, we think, doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know when you're coming home. It's not like you can tell your dog, I'll be home at 5, okay, and then I'm going to take you outside to the park for a walk. So the dog doesn't really have a clue. And Hume, in a sense, would say, we are the dog because we have no clue. We see things happening, but we don't really know whether these things are causally chained, connected with one another. We don't really know whether every time I throw a stone in a body of water, ripples are caused as a result of my throwing the stone. The correct way to think about the world, Hume would say, is that to see it as a number of events that happen, one after another. Okay, one event happens after another. For example, I wake up in the morning and I start reading a book, for example. But it's my reading the book is not an effect caused by my waking up. So these are two separate events. One event is my waking up. A second event might be my washing my face in the sink. And a third event, my reading a book. But these are not necessarily chained in a causal relation. So, similarly, Hume would say, there's no reason to believe that if I throw a rock into a body of water and then I see the ripples are the effect of that certain cause, which is the stone hitting the water. And so perhaps cause and effect is all in our minds, or rather I should say causality, cause and effect. This thing that we call the law of cause and effect is something that exists in our minds because our minds are made in such a way that we try to make sense of reality. And in order for us to make sense of reality, we have to make those connections. You see, we have to make those connections, and then we imagine that events and things in the world are causally connected. So there's such thing in the universe as cause and effect. Okay, the next question. The next question is, again, a completely different question, but a very fascinating question. Have you ever thought about, let's put it this way. I take a ruler and I start measuring something, okay? With my ruler, I measure, let's say, my computer. Okay, it's 30 centimeters long, or a certain number of inches, or a foot long. So the ruler is supposed to measure distance, objects, and so on. It's supposed to measure length of something. Most people, maybe not so many nowadays because of cell phones, but I remember more people in the past used to wear watches, wristwatches. And that is also an instrument, a wristwatch. And it measures something. But what does it measure? See, with a ruler, I can measure the length of this table. And with my watch, well, you would say, duh, you measure the length of time. But what exactly is time? It's that thing that you measure with your watch. And what is that thing that you measure? You see where this is going. So what exactly is time? Time is very, very enigmatic. What exactly is time? Space is enigmatic too. I'm not saying that. Because what is space? But we have some sort of experience of space. Time is very strange. What exactly is time? Do we experience time? Is it time that moves along from past, present, and future, or we are moving through time? These are really interesting questions, very difficult questions. In one of my lectures, in particular, the lecture on Ellis McTaggart, I explained how McTaggart's metaphysical idea of reality is that time doesn't exist. Time, in a sense, time is not real. But we will discover that in that lecture. So time, think about it. Time is something very puzzling. Another question. What is a person? Once again, as I said earlier, you could ask a scientist, what is a person? And the scientist would give you certain physical characteristics, perhaps DNA, perhaps taxonomy, or a description of our species and so on. But what is a person? A person in a sense, for example, in the moral sense, not to mention the idea of morality, by the way. What is morality? Is morality something that transcends the physical world, something that exists independently of the physical world, something by virtue of which we human beings are able to recognize that some things are right, some things are wrong. We can't really point our fingers to what that means, but perhaps we have a sense of that. And this connects to the idea of God. Some people say that it is God, the paradigm and the anchor of morality, without whom nothing would be right or wrong. But what is a person? So that's the way I mean what is a person. What is a person in a sense, in a moral sense, in the sense of what exactly is, and also in a practical sense, what is a person? I am a person. Well, Frank is a person. But what makes Frank and myself persons? Why are we the same? This, by the way, this last question leads to another question, related question. What is the mind? Now, many people would say, and especially nowadays, I read a lot of articles. Just the other day, a friend of mine sent me an article and said, hey, scientists know what the mind is. The mind is nothing but the brain. So the brain, this organ that is lodged inside our cranium, squishy oatmeal-like substance organ that we know as the brain, that is the mind. Don't try to, some scientists would say this, don't try to go outside the physical world. There's no such thing as the soul. There's nothing outside nature. Everything that exists is nature. And so the mind is nature. What we call the mind is really what the brain does, or what the brain is. But there are many examples. In one of my lectures, we will explore this. There are many examples that seems to show that idea, the idea that the mind and the brain are the same thing, cannot be true, because when we talk about the mind, we mean feelings, mental contents, okay, experiences. For example, right now I'm thinking that I would love to go on vacation to some beautiful tropical island and rest under a palm tree. But you see, that thought, the thought that I'm having, first of all, you cannot experience it. Okay, that's private, it's mine. But if you were to ask, where exactly does that particular thought that I just had of the palm tree and the island, where does that thought exist? Because it does exist, you can't deny it, right? Does it exist in the mind? Well, obviously it exists in the mind because I imagined that. But then, if it exists in the mind, and the mind is the brain, it means that it exists in the brain. But when we look at the brain, if I'm, for example, right now visiting some neuroscientists, and they are studying my brain, let's assume that they can open my brain and look inside, okay, without killing me. They look inside, they stick their fingers, they put instruments, cameras. I'm pretty sure that they will never be able to, even with a tiny camera, to capture the image that I'm thinking of, namely the island and the palm tree. And so what exactly is that thought? Now, some people say, well, that thought is nothing but what the brain does. But yet again, it doesn't seem that what the brain does, essentially what we know about the brain is that the brain has neurons, axons, and all sorts of connections between neurons. And these neurons fire certain chemicals. And these chemicals travel and enter another neuron, and they communicate that way. That's my rough explanation of how the brain works, and I hope if there are psychologists or neuroscientists watching this video, don't just think that. But anyway, whatever. Anyway, that's the way it works. So my point is, those chemicals in the brain and the way the electrical impulses and that happen, activities that happen in my brain, are not identical to the picture that I have in my mind of an island and a palm tree. Okay, so there are many other examples of this that show that the mind is not a physical thing. And if it's not physical, and it is the heart of, the mind is the heart, isn't that funny? So the mind is not a physical object, it's not the brain. Then the mind must be something that exists, but exists outside this realm, physical realm of objects and matter and so on. All right, let's look at another question. What is identity? This is my favorite question. Think about the following. Let's say that you have a cell phone. I'm pretty sure most people have a cell phone. And you take apart the cell phone. First of all, you take it out of the protective case. Then you remove the screen. Okay, you take it apart, and you have all the parts, all the chips, all the little gadgets laid out on your desk. Okay. Now let's say that you want to put it back together. First of all, right off the bat, if I take all the parts that I just took apart and I put them back, okay, and I assuming that I can do that, and assume that I succeed and I put everything back the way it was, and the cell phone works just fine, the way it was working before I took it apart. Just right off the bat, think about it. Is that cell phone the same cell phone? Is it identical to the cell phone that I previously had, the cell phone that I took apart? Or it's something completely different. It is another object. Well, most people would say, no, it's not another object. It's the same object. Okay, let's make it more interesting now. Let's say that, once again, you take it apart, all the pieces in front of you, and you substitute a little chip, okay? And you buy a new chip that has the same function, and you rebuild the phone with a new chip. Now the question is now this phone identical to the previous phone? In other words, is this the same phone, my phone, the one that I bought? Most people would say, yes, of course. The fact that you just changed one chip doesn't mean that it's different. It's a different phone. Now, continue this experiment and change all the parts of the phone, right? To the point where no original part is left. Would you say that that's the same phone? If you say yes, then you have to explain to me what makes the phone. What is my phone? What is it that gives my phone the identity of my phone? At this point, however, I would say that most people would say, no, once you change all the parts, it's no longer your phone. It looks like it. It might be the same, because look, I use the same parts, so it looks just the same. It's very similar. It's black, it has the same parts, the same dimension, length, and so on. But it's not your original phone. But then I ask you, what exactly is the original phone? If changing one part or a couple doesn't change the phone, how many parts do I have to change before I can say, this is no longer my phone? It looks exactly like mine, but it's not mine. You see? And going back to the previous question, what is a person? A couple of questions ago, what is a person? Exactly that's what I mean. Let's conduct the same thought experiment. What is a person? Who am I? Okay. You start with as a zygote, and then a fetus, then a baby, that's what we call them. But the zygote and you are completely different. The fetus and you, I mean, when you were a fetus, that's what I mean, okay? When you were a fetus, and you now, let's say that you are 20 years old now, okay? Let's say you're looking at a photo of yourself in the womb, Okay? They're two different things. They're two different beings. As a matter of fact, no cell or fiber of that fetus is present at the moment right now in your body. Okay? Your brain has changed. Your body has changed. Your skin, your blood, your cells, everything. Your taste have changed. So, in other words, physical objects, as well as human beings, non-physical, physical objects and physical beings, animals and human beings, are subject to change. They constantly change. But if they constantly change, just like the cell phone, okay? Imagine the cell phone, you acquire new pieces, constantly changes. We don't say once we have replaced all the other pieces of the phone that it's the same phone. I mean, if we do, if people say, no, it's the same phone, I bite the bullet, it is the same phone. But if it is the same phone, here's the question. What makes that phone that phone? Just like this applies to yourself, to a person. If a person completely changes from the time that she is a fetus to the time she's an adult, then what exactly is that person? If every component, every piece of that person is completely different, then what is that person? On the other hand, if you say, no, it's not the same, it is different, then identity doesn't exist. Nothing is identical. But if you say it's not the same, then you would have to say, of course, you might bite the bullet and say, no, I'm a different person. But it seems strange to say that, because we think that we are a self. We endure through time. We change, we become older, hair becomes gray, you get older, the skin changes, but it's always you. It's still you. But then if everything changes, what is the you? Very, very puzzling, right? Okay, let's look at at another question. Am I free? Am I free? Now, this is, I have to tell you, this is one of my personal favorite metaphysical questions, because I sometimes I struggle thinking about this, and I think about it to the point where I said, screw it, I can't continue thinking about it. Every single human being on this earth thinks that he or she is free. You are watching this video lecture right now. You would never think that the reason why you are watching this video is because you were somehow determined to do. Okay? What do I mean by determined? Here's the best explanation that I can give you of determined. There are different ways of formulating what it means to be determined. Here's one way. I take a quarter or coin and I insert it into one of those soda machines. Okay? Then I press a button. I select sparkling water. What happens? Well, we go back to by the way, we go back to cause and effect also, right? But anyway, the bottle of water Obviously, I'm talking about a functional soda machine. Everything works the way it's supposed to work. But the coin, press the button, the machine dispenses a bottle of water. Okay. Now, stupid question. Do you think the soda machine had a choice? Yeah. I'm going to dispense a bottle of water. Not a chance. The soda machine had no freedom whatsoever. So it was determined to do that. It was caused, it had a causal connection maybe. Another example. The example I gave you earlier of the domino pieces. This domino piece falls down. Okay? Did he have a choice? No, didn't have a choice. It was hit by another domino piece and it had to fall. Another way to explain what it means to be determined. Assume that that we know, but you don't have to assume. Let's say God, okay? There's God, and God creates the universe. And then God creates all human beings, and in creating all human beings, he sort of programs their lives. Okay? Of course, they're rich lives because they're the lives of human beings. We go to Mars, we do poetry, we watch videos, we drink water, and so on. But God programmed, just like a computer, an IT person would create a video game, for example, a program. And it programs all the events of your life. Okay? So, on December 29, 1978, Michael will go to the pool and swim a couple of laps, after which he will have a tuna sandwich. Okay? So, here's, what did I say? Michael, okay? It's the date and the time. He swims. He feels free. He feels in his mind, now I'm going to the swimming pool. And then after swimming some laps, he says, I'm kind of hungry now. I'm going to have a tuna sandwich. Okay? So he has this feeling of freedom that he decides what to do and when. But in reality, suppose that God programmed his life. He feels free, Michael, but he is not free. He is determined. So that's a possibility. As a matter of fact, many scientists nowadays, I think that the majority of scientists nowadays think that human beings are determined, just like machines, just like domino pieces, just like trees growing branches, just like everything else that I described, every other physical object. They say all physical objects are determined in that way. In other words, something happens that causes something else to happen. So freedom doesn't really exist. And in fact, many philosophers, many scientists say, what does being free even mean? Because think about it. What is the definition of freedom? Freedom is the capacity to do whatever you want. Perhaps you might want to define it that way. But what does that mean? The capacity. Where do you get that capacity? Okay? Now think about it. Let's say that I want to take a sip of water right now. Okay? I took a sip of water. And then I say, that's what I'm talking about. That's the capacity. I do have the capacity. I made the decision to take a sip of water, and I did it. But I could have decided not to do it because I'm free. Now, here's the counter argument. There are people who say that is just an illusion. As I explained, there are people who might argue that God programmed our lives. And so that person might say, the reason why you took that sip of water is not because you were free. You had the feeling of freedom, but that event was programmed. You had to do it because it was programmed. Just like you program your robot cleaner to sweep the floor in this room. Just programmed. All the movements, all the directions, it's all programmed. Similar for human beings. So the freedom is just an illusion. So this capacity of being free is really nothing but just an illusion. But the person who thinks that we are free says, but wait a minute, but don't you see that I took a sip of water because I wanted to take a sip of water? And if I didn't want to take a sip of water, I would not take a sip of water. But the determinist says, why do you say that? Think about it. What gave you that idea of taking a sip of water? Something must have given you that idea. For example, you were thirsty. But if you're thirsty, then you're not free to decide whether to take the sip of water or not. Well, let's say that you're stubborn and you say, oh yeah? Okay, I am not going to take a sip of water even if I'm thirsty. Well, at one point you're going to die. And let's say that you're very stubborn and you're going to die. Okay, you say, before you die, you say, you see, I told you I was free. And then you die. Does that demonstrate that you're free? Well, a determinist would say it doesn't really show that you were free. It only shows that something in your brain or in your mind was so powerful that made you want to prove me wrong, to the point where you decided not to drink water at all. Actually, I should say not you decided. That this force, this feeling inside you, made you want to show me that you could do it. I said, no, I don't understand what you mean. I made that decision. Now, here's the story. As I said before, what is the definition of freedom? Again, freedom is the capacity to do whatever you want. Okay? But everything that you want to do has a cause. Okay? Either I take a sip of water because I am thirsty, or because I want to demonstrate something to you, or there's no reason whatsoever. Think about it. There are only two options, aren't there? Either there's a reason why, and that reason why you say, well, I wanted to demonstrate you in this lecture the idea of freedom by taking a sip of water. Okay, well then that would be the reason. And you would say, well, but I was free to do that. Well, maybe so. But you were not free because you had a lecture to teach. And so the fact that you wanted to teach the lecture caused you to think about that demonstration, and then you took the sip of water. And consequently, taking the sip of water was not a free act. You say, but it was I who thought about giving this lecture. But why you wanted to give this lecture? Because they assigned me the course, my department assigned me the course in metaphysics. Well, but then that's the reason why you're teaching metaphysics, not because you wanted to do it. Oh, but I could have said no. You said yes. What made you say yes? So you see, the determinist says there's no way out of this downward spiral. Everything you do either has a reason or it doesn't. The reason is never your decision, but always external factors over which you have no control. Or there are no reasons whatsoever, in which case your actions would be random. Because if you move your hand or take a sip of water for no reason whatsoever, then if I ask you, why did you do it? I don't know. Well, then you were not in control of that action, right? Now, let's go back, a step back of what I said a second ago. That every action that you perform is caused or is brought about by something external over which you have no control. Now, some people say, well, that's not true, because what if I have a thought? I said, I'm hungry, I eat a sandwich. That comes from within myself, okay? So it's not external, it's internal. Big deal, the determinist says. Think about it. Right now, your body is producing red blood cells. It's an internal event, but you don't have control of it. So what makes you think that just because it comes from within you, from your brain or from your mind, you have control, you're free? So in other words, the determinists say there's no definition of what it is to be free. So freedom doesn't make any sense. There's no freedom. Every act has a cause. Okay? And if every act has a cause, then you're not free. Whether you did it or someone else made you do it, you're not free. That's the idea of freedom. That's how difficult it is to think, am I free? It's incredible. Sometimes I think, well, we can't be free because everything that we do is caused by something else. I go to the bathroom. That's an urge. It's not me. Or have you ever asked yourself how you acquired your taste in music, your taste in food, okay, in politics, your sexual preferences? Those are not things that you can switch on and off, or you can go left or right any way you want. They're pretty much decided. Now, some people say, "Oh, but I liked chicken for 40 years, and then when I turned 41, I became a vegan." Same diff. It's the same story. Something has changed, but what made that change? You say, well, but I studied, I read, I changed my mind. But exactly what changed your mind? It's the study. It's the information. So in other words, sometimes I think, are we really free? Is there a meaning of freedom? What does that mean to be free? If everything is caused by something else. Some people even argue. I have a friend who wrote a book where he says that freedom, in order to understand freedom, we have to understand how the world works at a very fundamental level. And at the very fundamental level, subatomic level, at the quantum level, some things are random. But not random in a vulgar way, in a bad way. In a way that this cascade of random events result in our free actions. Very complicated. Anyway, now let me give you, after explaining some of these questions, let me give you a more formal definition of metaphysics. Metaphysics is philosophy, but it is a branch of philosophy. As you all know, philosophy has different branches: ethics, logic, aesthetics, and so on. Epistemology, for example. And metaphysics is one of those branches. And it is the specific branch that studies all these questions and more. All these questions about existence, all these questions about nature, about substance, about freedom, about time, and so on. As I was saying earlier, questions about the world, questions that are left unanswered by the natural sciences, okay? Although, again, as I said before, many scientists today think that they can answer these questions. What is morality? I can tell you. Science can tell you this. Science can tell you everything. I don't think so. I don't believe so. I believe that there are questions, the very question, the meaning, question of meaning, why we're here, what is the meaning of existence, that science might never be able to answer. If you ask me, my personal opinion, I think that science will never be able to answer the question of the mind. What is the mind? That's my personal idea anyway. The term metaphysics was first used by Aristotle, who wrote the Physics. The Physics was a book about the physical world, how nature works. And Metaphysics is a book that he wrote after the Physics. So metaphysics literally means meta, after the physics. Another story says that the librarian in Alexandria placed all the books of Aristotle on a shelf, and then the books where he talks about the first philosophy, these things about reality and so on, and existence and being, he placed these books after the others, and so that meant metaphysics. What about ontology? Ontology is a branch of metaphysics. Okay, a branch of the specific branch of metaphysics. If you don't want to think of it as a branch, think of it as an area that asks questions, but it specializes on the questions relating to the nature of existence and being. Let me talk about two very interesting foundational principles of metaphysics. There are many others, but these two seem to be very important. The first one is known as the principle of noncontradiction. This is a principle, by the way, that we can't prove. We can't prove, some people might say, we can't prove empirically by conducting an experiment. How do we know? But it seems to be a fundamental principle of reality. A true metaphysical principle. Namely, no real being can both be and not be at the same time, in the same respect. So I, for example, cannot exist and not exist at the same time. Either I exist or I don't exist. Can't be both. Something cannot be fire and water at the same time. All right. That kind of idea. The other one is my favorite principle in metaphysics. It's known as the principle of sufficient reason. The principle of sufficient reason says the following. Everything that exists, that we think that exists, bottles of water, cell phones, computers, everything that exists has an explanation. There's no object in the world that is just there willy-nilly. It's got to have an explanation. Now, the explanation is either itself, so that object is self-explained, or the explanation must be external. Okay? And so it means that the object must have an efficient cause, as Aristotle called an efficient cause. Right? So, for example, there's the material cause. A chair made of wood. The wood is the material cause. But there's a person who creates, with that wood, creates a chair. And that would be, okay, this efficient cause. And so either something exists, and that's the explanation, or there must be an exterior, extrinsic explanation. For example, I don't explain myself. If you look at a person or a dog, you would never say, oh, that's dog. End of the story. Okay? If I ask you, why is he there? Because it's there. You can't say that. You will have to say, because mommy and daddy dog made him or her. Me, same story. Mom and dad made me. What explains my mom and dad? Their parents, and so on. What about an example of an entity or a being that explains itself? Well, religious people say God explains itself. Who created God? No one created God. God just is. Right? Many religions say there's no that's the wrong question. Nothing or nobody made God. It's just God. It's just there. It exists. But how do you explain his existence? By its existence. Okay. Then in metaphysics, there are many, many different theories, many different interesting theories that in the following lectures, video lectures, I will touch upon and explain. One of the many theories, since right now, as I'm shooting this video, it's 2022, beginning of 2022. Today is, is the 3rd of January 2022. And there's a new movie, a new Matrix movie. So it's interesting to think about it in those terms. And one of the theories with which the movie The Matrix, go watch it if you haven't watched it, toys with which toys is realism, is existence. Okay? And one theory is known as naive realism. Naive realism is the theory that says what I perceive, what people perceive under ordinary conditions, not under the influence of drugs or alcohol, alcohol is a drug, or any other situation. Normal people like me and you, I'm looking at my office, my desk, my computer. That's the way reality is. That's naive realism. Most philosophers, most scientists would say, well, there's no reason to believe that the world is made of apples, beds, pizzas, babies. Okay? That's our level, our realm, our level of perception anyway. But the world is not made of that. And another theory is, in fact, idealism. Idealism is very interesting. George Berkeley, an 18th century philosopher, is attributed to this idea. He thought that there are no material things. Of course you can touch things and say this is material. What does that mean is material? How do you verify that is material? Think about it. You experience the world, whatever you call the world, and reality, whatever you call reality. But you can't, so to speak, think about it. Sometimes people think that reality is like a suit. You take off your suit, you step out of your suit, so to speak, and you see naked reality. You can't do that. No one can do that. If there is a God, God can do that. God understands reality. But we can't do that because we cannot have a completely objective understanding of reality. And so even if we touch things, it doesn't mean that they really exist. Again, go watch The Matrix, right? In The Matrix, life is all an illusion created by the Matrix, the main computer. The computer that feeds you information. And you think that you are outside eating pizza with your friends and you have the taste of pizza in your mouth, but it's all an illusion. All it takes is this, or the mind. Okay, the information that tells the mind that you're having those impulses, that information, the taste and the experience and so on. And so the only thing that we can be sure 100% of is that reality is just a bunch of ideas and the minds that hold these ideas. Okay? But going back to what I said before about René Descartes, the real you, the real me, the real us is not the physical objects. Real us is the mind. Well, Descartes thought that the mind was a substance, a non-physical substance. Berkeley, different story. But that's the idea, that all that exists is minds, and we perceive ideas. To be is to be perceived, and these ideas are put there by God, according to Berkeley. And so everything is an idea. Everything is everything that exists spiritually, not physically. Another theory is, we will see it in a lecture on Plato and the forms and the cave and the divided line, is Platonic realism. So reality, according to Plato was influenced by other philosophers, in particular by Pythagoras. Plato believed that, you see, reality is not what we experience with our senses. Our senses are deceiving. Reality, consequently, is not physical. What we call physical is a copy, okay, an imperfect copy. Remember when in the first slide I showed you Plato lecturing. It said, everything has an essence. Everything has a form. And Diogenes booed him off the stage, saying that's nonsense. What is the form of the emptiness of the cup? But so Plato, that's what Plato believed. But why? But think about why. Look around the world, and you see, for example, many different things that are red, or many different things that are beautiful, or many different things that are rectangular, circular. But now, when you think about it, what makes red things red? Well, you would say red, of course, the color red. Well, this gets complicated. So think about it, the example of beauty. There are many beautiful things. You recognize in your lifetime, there are many beautiful things that we call beautiful. Now, of course, people say, well, beauty is subjective. Even so, even if you say, well, this painting is beautiful, this car is beautiful for me, well, that's your opinion. Fine. So beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. That's fine. But Plato would say, although beauty is subjective, people have different tastes, all people have an idea of beauty. That's the thing. You see? It's not that beauty is a meaningless concept. You might have your taste and say, this is beautiful for me. No, I don't like it. That's ugly for me. This is beautiful for me. But you do have an idea of beauty. And that idea of beauty is what Plato calls the form. Okay? So there's a form of beauty. Down here in the physical world, we have different objects. And we have different minds, different people with different tastes. But there's one idea of beauty. See, there are many beautiful things. Beautiful paintings, beautiful apples, beautiful babies. But beauty is one. And somehow this form of beauty shares its property of beauty into many different physical objects. See? Similarly, there's an idea of justice, according to Plato. There's a form of justice. In Brooklyn, there's a form of justice that in Oklahoma might not be the idea of justice. They have different legal systems. New York State and Oklahoma have different legal systems. But never mind, because there is one idea of law, of right and wrong. Okay? What about friendship? Well, people have different understanding of friendship. Friendship between men and women, two men, a man and a dog. So they look different. My friendship with an animal is different from my friendship to my son or my wife or a friend. And yet, they share something fundamental. And again, that fundamental thing that they share, by virtue of which we can say that all these examples, which are very different from one another, they all have something specific in common, and that is the form. Okay? So, for Plato, reality is divided into two different, separate but connected realities or realms. One is reality of things that exist, but we can't see them with our eyes or touch them. And the other one is the physical world. The physical world that participates with its physical objects that participate into these forms, the forms of justice, the form of beauty, and so on. Okay. Another theory, well, other two theories. Materialism or, no, one theory, sorry. Materialism or physicalism. Some pre-Socratic philosophers, in the video of the pre-Socratic philosophers, I talk about this, that everything is physical. Everything is made of stuff, matter. For example, Thales, the pre-Socratic philosopher Thales, thought that everything was made of water. Everything is water, is a form of water. Democritus, who thought that the only thing that exists is matter, is a bunch of atoms, bunch of particles, infinite number of particles, in fact. They're in motion. They get together. They're, by the way, these individual atoms, according to Democritus, have different shapes and forms. We can't see them. We cannot see them. And they come together and form trees, horses, people, pizzas, and so on. And they're moved by the laws of nature. They bash into each other and they move. That's why Democritus thought that freedom doesn't exist, because human beings are made of these particles, these atoms, and each atom is just subject to the laws of nature. Consequently, what applies to the individual, it applies to the whole, which is a logical fallacy. But that's for another day. Also, there's a fascinating theory in metaphysics known as monism. Baruch Spinoza, okay, a Jewish Portuguese philosopher, very famous, revived a pre-Socratic theory known as monism. And according to Spinoza, according to monism, reality is not composed of parts. Reality is one thing. The ancient call it being. Spinoza called it nature or God, which is the same thing. It's one thing. But what about all the particular things that we experience? Well, different people and different objects. Well, those things are modes or expressions, essentially. They are expressions of the whole structure. And Spinoza in particular thought that the nature is everything. It is what we call God. Other people, like Parmenides, for example, thought that everything is one, and it's frozen. In fact, people like Zeno thought that even motion is an illusion, because reality is one frozen entity, one frozen being. Emotion is just an illusion. A mental illusion doesn't exist. Earlier I spoke about Descartes, René Descartes. René Descartes is the first dualist. Okay? Well, not exactly the first, but he's the first substance dualist. According to Descartes, reality consists of the mind, which is a non-physical substance, and matter, which is physical substance, extended in space. Some people think that these two interact. The problem is how these two things, which are completely different, physical, non-physical, how do they interact? Now, I want to end this video lecture by asking why. Why study metaphysics? There are many different reasons why to study metaphysics. To begin with, I wanted to say, to me, studying metaphysics is fun. Now think about it. Most of you might be happy, might have a great life. I hope so. But there are a lot of people who are also bored of life. They think, is this all that is in life? Just going to work, punching the card, working 8 hours, going out, paying bills, all sorts of issues and problems. When I study metaphysics, I wander with my brain. I travel. It makes me think of things that are not so petty, like paying bills and bureaucratic stuff that we have to do, paying taxes and so on. It's so beautiful to think of metaphysics, to think about reality, to think about time, to think about the existence of God. These are fascinating things. Also, we should study metaphysics because when we have an understanding of metaphysics, when we form our understanding of metaphysics, we thereby form our worldview. Okay? So, who you are, what do you do, what do you believe, what do you regard as right or wrong, are the products of metaphysical contemplation. Yes. Because whether you go to church or you do good deeds or you're a good person or a bad person, those things depend on your metaphysics. Whether you believe that there is a God or there isn't one, whether you believe that human beings are free or whether human beings are determined. These questions shape your worldview. So we must study metaphysics and try to have some good arguments and good understanding, inform our own opinions, informed opinions on the nature of reality. Another reason is simply because metaphysics, as I have shown throughout this lecture, metaphysics studies all those things that we deeply, deeply care about. Morality, the existence of God, the existence of the person, identity, who am I, whether God exists, and so on. Finally, we study metaphysics because we can't not study metaphysics, because it is our nature. By nature, we are curious. We are curious. We don't know a lot of things about the world. We don't know many things about the world. We know very little about the world. And consequently, that's the best thing that we have, metaphysics. Now, of course, scientists would say science is the best thing, because science, we understand. But remember that many scientists also delve into, step into metaphysics when they start talking about Higgs bosons and God particles and strings and things that happen in the background. They are in the metaphysics world. Okay? Great. I hope you enjoy this lecture, and I'll see you next time in the next lecture. All the best.